Every Sunday for 3 years, I drove 45 minutes each way to sit with my father. It started the week he called twice in one day, which he never did. When I arrived, the house already felt different. Mail stacked on the kitchen table, a slow drip under the sink that had been going long enough to warp the cabinet floor, a smell I didn't recognize that turned out to be a full trash bag he'd forgotten behind the back door. I fixed the sink. I stayed for dinner. I drove home in the dark. The following Sunday, I went back without being asked, and after that, it just became the pattern. My brother Marcus visited 8 times in 2 years. I know because my father mentioned it on a Tuesday in April, casually, the way he sometimes narrated things without editorializing. And the number stayed with me without my meaning to hold on to it. Marcus lives roughly an hour away. He has a job and 2 kids and real obligations. I never said anything about the visits. I'm not good at keeping score, or maybe I'm too good at it, and I just refuse to play. Either way, I kept driving. What I do professionally is not interesting to explain at family dinners. I'm a notary public at a title and document services office. Deeds, affidavits, loan closings, estate instruments. People bring me things to sign, and my job is to make sure the execution is correct, that the document will hold if it ever has to. My father found it amusing. "You get paid to watch people sign their names," he said once. I told him that was about right. His 3rd year in that house alone got harder to predict. Good weeks he'd quiz me on old neighborhood trivia. Who built which street? What a car cost in 1977? The name of a hardware store that closed before I was born. Bad weeks he'd sleep until noon and forget we'd spoken the day before. I stopped planning around his health because there was no pattern that held. I just kept showing up. One Sunday in October, he asked me to stay after dinner. I assumed it was about the gutters, and we'd been putting that off since September. Instead, he walked me to the study, held the door open, and waited for me to come inside. When I crossed the threshold, he locked it behind us. "There's something I need done correctly," he said, "and you're the right person to do it." He had already thought it through. That was the first thing I noticed. No uncertainty, no testing the idea out loud, no asking me what I thought. He had made a decision weeks ago, and he was telling me about it now. The existing will split everything equally between Marcus and me. The house, the accounts, a few other things. He said that was the fair arrangement when he wrote it. He no longer believed it was fair. "I want the house to go to you," he said, "not split, to you." He explained his reasoning slowly, and I let him finish before I said anything. Marcus had been asking about the property, not directly, but in the way of someone who was already planning. Comments that circled back through the aunt, through cousins, questions about market values and timelines, the kind of small caliber scouting that people think goes unnoticed. My father had noticed. He'd been noticing for over a year and hadn't said anything to anyone. He wanted a codicil, a properly executed amendment to the existing will, specific and airtight. He asked me to draft it because I was the right person. I prepared these instruments regularly. I knew exactly what the form required, and I knew what made a codicil hold up under challenge versus what made it fall apart. He didn't spell any of that out. He just said, "You know how these things work." I drafted it the following week. My colleague at the office certified the execution. Then we needed a second witness. We called Marcus. My father told him there were some additional estate documents that required a witness signature. Routine paperwork? Nothing significant. Marcus came over on a Thursday afternoon. He sat at the kitchen table and asked what he was signing. My father said, "A small addition to the estate documents." Marcus skimmed the opening paragraph, asked no further questions, and signed his name on the witness line. I kept a certified copy in the back of a filing cabinet at my office. I didn't mention to Marcus that I had it. There was no reason to say so, and in the months that followed, every reason not to. My father died on a Wednesday in March, 6 weeks after we filed the codicil. The call came at 6 in the morning. Marcus called me, which surprised me. We hadn't spoken directly in several months. He sounded composed, almost clinical, the way some people go still under pressure as a form of control. He said the paramedics had already come and gone. He said he was at the house. He asked if I was on my way. The funeral was 4 days later. I don't remember it in sequence. I remember the cold and the number of people who came, and Marcus at the entrance shaking hands the way he shook hands at family events. Smooth, with eye contact, saying the right things at the right volume. Someone told me he had handled all the arrangements himself. I hadn't been asked. What I noticed was how quickly he moved afterward. Within 48 hours of the funeral, he was making calls about the estate. I found out through the aunt, who mentioned it offhand over the phone, assuming I already knew and was simply coordinating. He was getting ahead of the administrative burden, she said, trying to be responsible. She said it like it was a compliment. I didn't say anything. 3 days after the funeral, Marcus called me directly. He wanted to schedule a family meeting to go over the estate documents. He mentioned the house twice. He mentioned he'd already been in contact with a realtor to get a preliminary sense of value. He said it was good to be informed before the family sat down together. Then he said it. Dad only left one will. I already have it. He said it the way you say something you expect no one to question. Flat and final, like closing a door. I said said I understood and that I'd be at the meeting. I hung up and sat with that sentence for a long time. He knew I had been there every Sunday for 3 years. He knew I knew that house. What he didn't know was what I had drafted, certified, filed, and left sitting in a cabinet at my office, waiting for exactly this. Marcus held the meeting on a Saturday morning at the house. He had already printed documents. That detail settled something for me before anyone spoke. He had prepared authorization papers, a will summary, a timeline for the estate. He hadn't brought notes. He had a packet. This wasn't organization. This was a presentation. There were 8 of us. The aunt, 3 cousins, 2 family friends who had known our parents for 30 years. Marcus and me. He walked through the will clearly and efficiently. Equal split on paper, which he acknowledged. Then he explained why equal split on the house was impractical. A shared asset between 2 parties with different financial situations and different timelines created legal complications that could drag the estate into probate for years. He had a number from the realtor. He had drafted paperwork naming himself sole executor to simplify the administrative process and reduce the burden on everyone else. He made it sound like he was doing the family a favor. He asked everyone to sign. The aunt asked if there were any other documents, any amendments, any updates to the original will since it was drafted. Marcus said no. He said the document on the table was the complete estate record, and he had the original right there. I was quiet. I had been quiet since I walked in. Someone slid a sheet toward me. I looked at it. Then I looked at Marcus. He met my eyes with the kind of calm that only works when you're certain the other person has nothing on you. I said I needed time to review before signing anything. Marcus said there was no urgency, that it was just administrative paperwork. He said it the way you say something you expect to be resolved by the following weekend. I drove home without signing. I said nothing to anyone about the codicil, about the certified copy, about the filing cabinet. I kept waiting to feel certain that Marcus would do the right thing on his own. He had been my brother for 38 years. I wanted to be wrong about what I was watching. I was not wrong. The call started the following week, not from Marcus, yet from the family. The aunt first, then one cousin, then a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 4 years. The message came in different registers depending on who was delivering it, some gentle, some blunt, but it was always the same message. Sign the papers, let Marcus handle it, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The family is grieving. This isn't the moment. Then a second version started circulating. I heard it from 2 separate people on the same day, which told me it hadn't arrived independently. The version was this: I had been spending time at the house during my father's illness in a way that was more calculated than filial, that I had used my professional access to insert myself into his estate documents, that my father, toward the end, had not always been in a position to fully understand what he was agreeing to. I knew exactly where that version had come from. Marcus had decided that if the document couldn't be ignored, it could be reframed, and reframing me was the cleaner move. I documented every call, dates, times, a summary of what was said and by whom. I did it the same way I document anything at work, not out of anger, just as a habit. If something matters, you keep a record of it. I had been doing this long enough that it didn't feel dramatic. It just felt correct. A letter circulated in the 3rd week. It didn't name me directly. It expressed concern about the clarity of our father's wishes in his final months and the importance of honoring the original documented will. It asked the family to present a unified position. 7 people signed it. Marcus called me the same day the letter went out. He said this was difficult for everyone. He said the family needed closure and that prolonging it was causing real harm to people who were already hurting. He used the word family 4 times in 3 minutes. I said I understood. I did not sign anything. 6 weeks after the family meeting, Marcus went to see Richard. Richard was the family attorney, had been for 20 years, long enough that my father trusted him with originals. My father had used him for the initial will, for a property transfer in 2019, and for other estate matters over the years. When my father asked me to file the certified codicil, he had asked me to send a sealed copy to Richard directly. I had done that the same week we executed the document. Marcus went to Richard to move the probate process forward. He brought the original will, the executor authorization papers, and the family letter with its 7 signatures. He had a proposed probate timeline. He had arranged to have the realtor's preliminary valuation attached. He had everything he thought he needed. Richard told him there was a second document on file, sealed, filed 8 months prior, signed by both testator and witnesses. He confirmed it existed and that he was obligated to present it as part of the estate record. He would not speculate on its contents outside the proper process. I don't know exactly what was said after that. What I know is that Marcus called me at 8:40 in the evening, and he was not composed the way he had been at the funeral or at the family meeting or in any of the calls that came back through the cousins. His voice was flat, but the flatness was holding something back. The kind of flat that happens when someone is angry and has decided to be strategic about it. He said the document was fraudulent. He said our father had not been of sound mind when it was prepared. He said I had exploited my professional position to insert language into an estate instrument that didn't reflect our father's actual intentions. He said he expected me to contact Richard immediately and have it withdrawn. You had no right to be in those documents, he said. Then he said, you know I was in that room. He said it like a threat, like pointing at evidence he thought I hadn't considered, some leverage he assumed I'd overlooked. I said, yes, you were. He paused. He called back once. I didn't answer. He came to my apartment 3 days later. I hadn't invited him, and he hadn't asked. I let him in. He stood in my kitchen and didn't sit down. He said he wasn't there to argue. He said he was there because families didn't settle things in courtrooms, and because there had to be a way through this that didn't destroy what was left. I said okay, and I listened. After everything I've done for this family, he said. He meant the years after our mother died. He'd managed the accounts, coordinated the medical decisions, kept everyone informed and organized through the grief. He believed he had earned something real, not in a petty way, in a structural, bone-deep way. He had done the visible work for years. He considered himself the one who held things together, and a family home going to the quiet brother who drove on Sundays felt, to him, like theft, like I had snuck in through the back. He said our father had been confused in his final months. He said I had been present for that confusion in a way that gave me access Marcus didn't have. He said the document, even if it was technically valid on its face, was the product of manipulation. He said he knew I was capable of preparing something that looked airtight while still being wrong. He still didn't know I had my own certified copy. He assumed the only document in existence was the sealed version with Richard, and that if Richard's copy could be discredited or challenged in probate, there would be nothing left to defend. I waited until he was finished. You were in that room, I said. You sat across from him. He told you what you were signing. You read the first paragraph. You signed your name on the witness line. He stared at me. You're making the worst mistake of your life, he said. I told him I'd see him at the hearing. He left without saying anything else. The door closed, and that was the last real conversation we've had. By the end of that week, 3 cousins and the aunt had signed an amended version of the family letter. This one formal, addressed to a probate attorney, asserting undue influence. Marcus had retained a lawyer who would argue that I had exploited a period of cognitive decline to alter an estate instrument in my favor. The house was being shown. I found out because one of the cousins mentioned it offhand, not realizing I hadn't been told. Marcus had called a realtor. There were scheduled showing times. He was moving as if the outcome were already settled, as if the document with Richard were a procedural inconvenience that would be resolved once enough pressure had been applied. I hired an estate attorney named Patricia. She laid out the timeline clearly. If I was going to assert the codicil and contest the executor designation, I had roughly 10 days before the probate clock moved in a direction that would be significantly harder to reverse. She asked if I had documentation. I told her I had the certified copy. She asked where it was. I told her it was in a filing cabinet at my office. She said, go get it. I drove to the office on a Sunday morning. The building was empty. I went to the back room where the filing cabinets were and opened the bottom drawer of the one against the far wall. The folder was exactly where I had placed it 8 months earlier. I took it out and set it on the desk. Certified codicil, clean execution, my signature, my colleague's notarization seal. 2 witnesses, dated 4 months before the period Marcus's attorney had characterized as the onset of cognitive decline. And on the witness line, in his handwriting, Marcus's signature. The date he sat at the kitchen table and signed what my father said was routine paperwork. I sat in the empty office for a few minutes. Not because I needed to think. I had already thought everything through. I just needed a moment before the next part started. I called Patricia first thing Monday morning. The probate hearing was quiet, the way these things are when the documentation is clean. Marcus's attorney made the undue influence argument thoroughly. My father had been in health decline. I had been present in ways Marcus had not. I had professional expertise in estate instruments and had prepared the document myself, which he framed as self-dealing. It was a coherent argument. It would have had real traction if there were nothing concrete to counter it. Patricia presented the certified codicil. Clean execution, proper form, 2 witnesses, notarized. Dated 8 months before my father's death and 4 months before the period Marcus's attorney had identified as the window of cognitive decline. And on the witness line, Marcus's signature, his handwriting, his date, his presence in that room. His attorney asked for additional time to respond. The court moved forward. The finding was that there was no credible evidence of undue influence. The document had been executed during a period when my father was fully competent by any established clinical or legal standard. The codicil stood. The executor designation Marcus had drafted for himself was set aside. Marcus stopped speaking to me the day of the hearing. He has not called since. 3 cousins sent quiet messages over the weeks that followed. Brief, careful texts, the kind of message that wants to be counted as an apology apology without fully making one. The aunt never reached out. 2 of the family friends stopped responding to the group thread. The people who signed a letter accusing me of manipulating a dying man have not addressed that letter since. I kept the house. It needs work. The gutters we kept putting off finally gave way on one side. The kitchen faucet runs slow. The study still smells like his books. I didn't feel like I had won anything. I just felt like something that had always been true finally got written down somewhere official. If you made it this far, drop a like and hit subscribe. New story every single day.